Well, they operated chiefly in Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, and Southwest Washington. Those areas have changed quite dramatically. And also, the economic and educational status of those residents in that area has changed quite a bit. It's certainly not, it was lower than it is now today. There were just more people in those areas, especially when you talk about Foggy Bottom and Southwest Washington, before urban renewal and the expansion of federal buildings into those areas. Also, significantly, there was a lot more African Americans living in those sections back then. Take Georgetown, for example. I have read that in the 1910 census of Georgetown, it reflected that 50% of the residents were African American. There are still 3 black churches in Georgetown that stand as a testimony of the past, though. Also, what happened especially the 40s, there was an influx of people moving into DC, which created a greater demand for housing. So landlords raised rents, and real estate investors pressured many black families in Georgetown to sell their homes, sometimes using questionable tactics. As far as Southwest Washington, my dad, for some reason, liked to attend Mass at St. Dominic's there in Southwest Washington. And back in those days when we went to Mass, St. Dominic's was right in the middle of a crowded neighborhood. The church there remains, but all those homes are gone, and most of them, or a lot of them, are lost to the Southwest Freeway. That's, of course, there today. Foggy Bottom was much different also. Foggy Bottom apparently got its name from a mixture of river fog and industrial smoke. There was a large gas works at 26 and G Street there in Foggy Bottom that emitted a foul odor that permeated the bottom, as it was called among the locals at that time. And the manual laborers that worked there in those industrial plants, black and white, usually were able to walk to and from their home and work. Well, DC historian Garrett Peck, his book about Prohibition in Washington, I believe the title is How Dry We Weren't, actually explains how housing density in DC loaned itself to bootlegging and later to the gambling business. One of the realities of housing density was alley dwellings. And they came about the way the city was constructed. Most of the primary residences were located in the front of the lot, close to the main street, which left a lot of room between the primary residence and the intervening alleys. Going back maybe even to close to the Civil War, when a lot of people came to Washington, it seems like they're always coming to Washington when there's a war, there was a greater need for housing. And some of the owners of those primary residences decided to build housing between the primary residence and the alley. These were usually substandard housings, unfortunately. And this created an economic environment such that it was easier for bootleggers and gamblers to sell what they wanted to do there. Most of the occupants of those housing alley dwellings by the 1930s were African American. And the economic conditions there, as I mentioned, basically many residents turned to a daily diversion from the hard times. And a lot of this was, I guess, in either booze or in placing bets. For example, for a 10-cent bet on a 3-digit number, you could be paid $60. And that was a lot of money back in those days. Joe Goffman was an African-American gentleman who grew up in Foggy Bottom. He lived to be 97 before he passed away in 2015. He and his wife had me in their home a number of times, and he was a great source of information about what the 20s and 30s were, how they were in Foggy Bottom. He especially described the most famous alley in Foggy Bottom, that is Snow's Court. He described how the housing there was substandard and many of the houses lacked basic utilities, and they were occupied sometimes by multiple families. He told me how rough times, Snow's Court was a rough place. He said that police often would not go in there. They would stand at the entrance and exit of the alley and ask somebody to go get somebody to come to the alley, in front of the alley, to speak to him. Joe told me he couldn't remember a Saturday night that an ambulance was going in there to take somebody out. He also told me about one of the people who worked for the Warrens during that time, named Chick Edmonds, Walter Chick Edmonds, and he lived right outside Snow's Court on 25th Street. And he told me that Chick had a close relationship with the Warren brothers. The Warren brothers could count on Chick, and Chick could count on the Warren brothers. And that was important those days because many black runners of booze, for example, found themselves in the front lines of violence between rival gangs. And sadly, if a body of a black person was pulled from the Potomac, they didn't get the same kind of attention from the police and from the media. So Chick, like I said, worked for the Warrens, very close to Warrens, and he said, and as I said, Warrens could count on Chick and Chick could count on the Warrens. And one time, Joe Goffman told me a story that Chick got arrested, and I guess during his arrest, he got had to go to the hospital because he was injured. Like was common in those days, you didn't give your right name when you were arrested. So Chick was in his hospital room, he had a police guard outside, and the Warren brothers found out about it and where he was. And at a designated time, an open truck filled with straw in the back pulled up to the window under Chick's hospital room, and he jumped out of the hospital window into the truck with a bed of straw, and off they went.